Welcome back to Boss Economics World, where we pull no punches, expose the economic clownery, and call out the government for turning your wallet into a pumpkin patch. I'm your host, the guy who's been screaming into the void about reckless policy for years, and today, oh boy, do we have a juicy one for you. Buckle up, folks, because the US government has once again decided to play economic Jenga with your grocery bills, your investments, and the entire food supply chain. Let's talk about the latest trade debacle with Mexico, a parasitic fly, and how this is just the tip of the iceberg in a government-induced economic dumpster fire. On July 9, 2025, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, slammed the brakes on livestock imports from Mexico, mere days after reopening trade following a 2-month suspension. Why, you ask? Because of a parasitic fly called the New World screwworm, a nasty little critter that can kill a full-grown steer in just 10 days by eating it from the inside out. Sounds like something out of a horror movie, right? Well, this horror show is playing out in real time, and it's not just about flies, it's about beef shortages, skyrocketing prices, trade wars, and, of course, the government's uncanny ability to make everything worse. Now, before you roll your eyes and say, oh, it's just a fly, how bad could it be? Let me hit you with the cold, hard truth. This isn't just about a bug. This is a textbook case of how short-sighted government policies, mismanagement of trade relations, and a complete failure to plan ahead are driving the U.S. economy into a ditch faster than you can say, record-high beef prices. So, grab your popcorn, or, I guess, your overpriced hamburger, and let's dive into the economic carnage, layer by layer, from the surface mess to the deep, systemic rot. Let's start with the most obvious pain point, your grocery bill. The U.S. has been grappling with a beef shortage for months, and this latest trade halt is pouring gasoline on the fire. Back in May 2025, the USDA first suspended livestock imports from Mexico over the same screwworm issue, and what happened? Beef prices went through the stratosphere. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the price of slaughter weight cattle hit an all-time high in June 2025, with wholesale beef prices jumping 18% year over year. And don't even get me started on retail, ground beef prices at your local supermarket spiked to an average of $6.50 per pound, up from $4.80 just a year ago, per USDA data. Now, Mexico isn't just a supplier of beef to the U.S., it's one of the biggest. In 2024, Mexico exported over 1.2 million head of cattle to the U.S., accounting for nearly 25% of total U.S. beef imports, according to the U.S. International Trade Commission. When you cut off a quarter of your supply overnight, it's not rocket science, prices go up, availability goes down, and families are left wondering if they'll need to take out a second mortgage just to afford Taco Tuesday. But here's the kicker, this isn't a new problem. The screwworm issue has been festering in Mexico for years, with outbreaks reported as far back as 2023. So why, oh why, did the USDA think it was a good idea to reopen trade on July 7, 2025, only to slam the door shut again 2 days later? Did they not see this coming? Or, and stay with me here, did they just not care? Either way, this flip-flopping is a masterclass in economic incompetence, and it's consumers and ranchers who are paying the price. Now, let's zoom out a bit and talk about the trade policy disaster at the heart of this fiasco. The U.S.-Mexico trade relationship is a cornerstone of North American economic stability, or at least, it's supposed to be. The USMCA, United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, signed in 2020, was heralded as a triumph of modern trade policy, promising seamless agricultural trade and economic integration. But here we are, 5 years later, and the USDA is treating Mexico like a pariah over a fly. Don't get me wrong, protecting the U.S. food supply is important. No one wants screwworm-infested cattle crossing the border. But the way the government is handling this is nothing short of economic malpractice. First, they suspend imports in May, sending shockwaves through the beef market. Then, they announce a reopening in July, giving ranchers, importers, and retailers a glimmer of hope, only to rip it away 48 hours later. This kind of whiplash doesn't just disrupt markets, it destroys trust. And trust, folks, is the lifeblood of trade. According to a 2025 report by the Peterson Institute for International Economics, trade policy uncertainty has already cost the U.S. economy $134 billion in lost GDP since 2020, with agriculture bearing the brunt of the damage. When you jerk your trading partners around like this, they start looking elsewhere. Mexico, for instance, has already begun ramping up beef exports to China, which imported a record 300,000 metric tons of Mexican beef in 2024, up 40% from the year before, per Mexico's National Institute of Statistics and Geography, INEGI. If the U.S. keeps treating Mexico like a yo-yo, don't be surprised if our southern neighbor decides to ditch us for greener pastures, or, in this case, hungrier markets. Now, let's dig into the real meat of the issue, pun intended. This whole screwworm saga is just a symptom of a much bigger disease, government mismanagement and its role in driving the U.S. economy into a serious recession. That's right, folks, I said the R word, and I'm not backing down. First, let's talk about the USDA's so-called plan to deal with the screwworm. Last month, they announced an $8.5 million facility in South Texas to produce 300 million sterile flies per week. Sounds impressive, right? Wrong. This is a band-aid on a bullet wound. Sterile fly programs have been around since the 1950s, and while they can be effective, they take years to make a dent in pest populations. The USDA itself admits that the screwworm won't be eradicated in Mexico until at least 2028, assuming everything goes perfectly. Meanwhile, beef shortages will continue, prices will keep rising, and the economic fallout will only get worse. But the real scandal here isn't the fly program, it's the fact that the government had no contingency plan to begin with. The screwworm isn't some freak act of nature, it's a known threat that's been on the USDA's radar for decades. Yet, instead of investing in long-term solutions, like bolstering domestic cattle production, diversifying import sources, or working with Mexico on a robust eradication program, the government sat on its hands until the crisis exploded in our faces. And now, they're scrambling to look tough by shutting down trade, as if that's going to fix anything. This kind of reactive, knee-jerk policymaking is exactly why the U.S. economy is teetering on the edge of a recession. According to the Federal Reserve's latest projections, GDP growth in 2025 is expected to slow to just 1.8%, down from 2.5% in 2024. Inflation, meanwhile, is stuck at 4.2%, well above the Fed's 2% target, and food inflation is even worse, clocking in at 6.7% year-over-year, per the Consumer Price Index. Add in the beef shortage, supply chain disruptions, and a trade policy that's alienating our closest allies, and you've got a recipe for economic disaster. And don't forget, folks, this isn't happening in a vacuum. The government's mishandling of the screwworm crisis is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. Look at the energy sector, where policies have driven up fuel costs by 22% since 2023, according to the Energy Information Administration. Look at housing, where mortgage rates are hovering at 7.5%, pricing out millions of first-time buyers, per Freddie Mac. And look at fiscal policy, where the national debt just hit $36 trillion, or 130% of GDP, according to the Congressional Budget Office. Everywhere you turn, the government is dropping the ball, and the economy is paying the price. So, what's the takeaway from all this, folks? It's simple, the government's mismanagement of the screwworm crisis is a microcosm of its broader failure to manage the economy. By prioritizing optics over solutions, flip-flopping on trade, and failing to plan ahead, they've turned a manageable problem into a full-blown economic catastrophe. And who's left holding the bag? You, me, and every hard-working American trying to put food on the table. But here's the good news, we don't have to sit back and take it. If you're an everyday citizen worried about your grocery bill, start demanding accountability from your elected officials. If you're a finance pro watching this train wreck unfold, it's time to hedge your bets, look into commodities like beef futures, which have surged 15% since May, per the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, or diversify into international markets less exposed to U.S. policy nonsense. And if you're anyone with a pulse, it's time to wake up and realize that the government isn't going to save us, it's too busy saving face. This is Boss Economics World, signing off with a friendly reminder, when the government hands you flies, don't just swat them, swat the clowns running the show. See you next time, and keep your wallets close and your skepticism closer.